It's great to have you joining us on Radio Free Georgia's In Tune to Nature program. I'm host Carrie Freeman, coming to you in September of 2024 from Atlanta in the Muskogee Creek Territory in the foothills of the Appalachia Mountain Range. Today, we're going to be talking about Project 2025, the far right-wing plan, if Trump is elected president, to expand offshore drilling that would threaten ocean animals through pollution and oil spills, endanger coastal communities, and divert investment from renewable energy, thus exacerbating the climate crisis, which in turn also continues to degrade ocean wildlife further. This is the concern of our guest, Angelo Villagomez, a senior fellow of conservation at the Center for American Progress. The Center for American Progress is an independent, nonprofit, and nonpartisan policy institute that for over 20 years has been dedicated to improving the lives of all Americans through developing bold, progressive policy ideas, challenging the media to cover the issues that truly matter, and shaping the national policy debate. Their website is americanprogress.org. Our guest today is Angelo Villagomez, a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, where he focuses on indigenous-led conservation. Born in a village on an island in the western Pacific Ocean next to the Mariana Trench, Angelo is a wildlife conservation advocate who uses indigenous knowledge and values and the scientific method to address modern threats, including habitat loss, fishing, and climate colonialism. Angelo worked for 14 years at the Pew Charitable Trust, where he was an advocate for the designation and expansion of the national marine monuments in the Pacific Islands and a policy expert on global shark conservation. During his tenure at Pew, he led efforts to secure an agreement at the International Union for Conservation of Nature, committing governments to protect at least 30% of the ocean as highly protected marine areas. Angelo holds bachelor's degrees in biology from the University of Richmond and environmental policy from Rollins College. He describes himself as a mediocre ukulele player who enjoys scuba diving in warm tropical waters full of fish. That does sound awesome. Welcome, Angelo.
Hey, Carrie, thanks for having me on the show today.
I kind of want to, have you play the ukulele, but I feel like we need to get to business here.
We can do that on a later podcast.
Okay. We've heard a lot about Project 2025 in the news, but since the document is hundreds of pages long, the majority of us don't have time to read it, and thus we rely on journalists or activists like yourself to study and interpret its implications for us as American citizens and Earthlings. To begin, can you just give us a basic summary of what Project 2025 is and why we should care?
Sure. So this is coming from the Heritage Foundation.
Okay.
And if you've never heard of them, this is the group based in Washington, D.C. that picked Trump's 3 Supreme Court justices, right? So these are far right extreme folks. And Project 2025, it's a 900-page document, and it sort of sets their agenda for the next conservative president. And the people who wrote it, for the most part, worked in the last conservative presidential administration. I think about 3/4 of them worked. And it kind of covers every topic that you could imagine under the sun, from healthcare to conservation to international relations to climate change. And I think we're here to talk today about offshore drilling.
And yeah, Angelo, as an environmentalist, I was already concerned about Project 2025 because I was reading about how their policies would deny the human-caused climate crisis and undermine the Environmental Protection Agency, enabling more toxic pollution, and end protection for environmental justice initiatives for hardest-hit communities. And that's irresponsible enough. And then I read an article of yours entitled Project 2025's Plan to Drill, Baby Drill Threatens Ocean Health and Economic Stability. And that helped me understand how Project 2025 also has implications for the health of our oceans and coastal habitats, particularly through oil and gas drilling. Can you explain your concerns?
So we all know about the big oil spill that happened about 10 years in the Gulf of Mexico. And that is the absolute worst case scenario of what can happen with offshore drilling. And we're actually in a place right now in the United States where we are drilling more oil than we have at any other time. But Project 2025, what we've done is we have taken a look at all of the individual issues and tried to pull out the details so that people could understand it. Now, if you live in a coastal state, like say Texas, Florida on the East Coast, tourism, fishing is very important for your economy and for your state. And one of the things that Project 2025 will do is they plan to reinstate, it's called Secretary Order 3350, and it's called the America First Offshore Energy Strategy. And it calls for basically drilling everywhere from Texas to New York. This is a real threat to economies all along the East Coast and the Gulf Coast. It threatens with pollution, threatens with oil spills, it threatens the fisheries that are there.
And Angelo, how are we going to meet our 30 by 30 conservation commitments to protect 30% of our land and sea habitats and species by 2030 to stop mass extinctions and to mitigate the climate crisis if we're opening up even more of the ocean to industrial mining and drilling?
Yeah, so that's the real threat of Project 2025. And the article that we were just talking about, it talks about offshore drilling. Other threats to the ocean that are highlighted in Project 2025 are, you just mentioned the overturning of the 30 by 30 initiative, which is an attempt, a global attempt to protect 30% of lands and waters. But Project 2025 also calls for some of the dismantling of the tools that we use to protect lands and oceans. One of those is the Antiquities Act, which is a law that many of our national parks were used, but they were created with the Antiquities Act going all the way back to Teddy Roosevelt. And then Project 2025 also would dismantle the National Marine Sanctuary Program. And this is another one of our laws. We have a type of national park on the water. It's called a National Marine Sanctuary. There's over a dozen. And what Project 2025 outlines is how they would open these areas to industrial fishing. They would open them to offshore drilling for oil. And there's even the potential for mining for deep sea minerals.
Oh, wow. And how are wild animals in the oceans put at risk of death or suffering through these far right policies that would open up so much more of the ocean to mining and drilling?
Yeah, again, these big threats to the ocean can be things in industrial activities from fishing or from drilling. We have an agency called the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. It's for short, it's called NOAA,
Yeah.
and they manage all of our fisheries in the country. Uh, Project 2025 calls for the dismantling of NOAA.
Hmm.
Not only do they manage our fisheries, but they also manage, they're the people who give us the data when there's a hurricane, uh,
Oh,
the National Weather Service. Uh, the Project 2025 wants to privatize the National Weather Service. So, where are we going to get our hurricane data for? Are we going to have to pay for it? That's a real threat. But you were asking how the dismantling of NOAA is going to harm our wildlife and our fish,
yeah.
whales. Right now we manage our fisheries at a national level. And any fisheries manager will tell you that they don't have enough money. It's as difficult as it is. And Project 2025 wants to let go of a lot of those federal staff. They want to make it more difficult for them to collect the data. They want to make it so they can't use the word climate change or study climate change. And climate change is a real threat to many of these habitats and to many of these species. And so if these federal agencies are hamstrung in their ability to manage these regions, it's only going to continue to harm whales, fish, marine mammals, and so on.
Because there's a lot of noise pollution also. Because I mean, yes, we're worried about the worst case scenario of the oil spills, but just all the activity creates all kinds of vibrations and noise that affects so many aquatic animals and disrupt their livelihood.
Yeah, so what's happening there is what you're describing is when oil companies are looking for places to drill for oil,
Yeah.
they have to find it deep below the ocean, and so they have these machines that sort of like make a really loud noise. They blast out like a really loud noise, and it's so loud that it goes into the substrate, and then it bounces back up, and they're able to tell, is there oil there? What is I'm not a geologist, so I can't like
Yeah.
describe exactly what it
Yeah.
is. But like what kind of rocks are down there and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And as you mentioned, like that's extremely loud. A lot of times we focus on, the animals that get caught in nets. Um,
Yeah.
these loud noises are also harm. And for us, ironically, it's a silent harm, because we actually don't see it, right? The humans don't
Right.
actually see it, because it's happening underwater.
That's why I like to mention it because when there's oil spills, it's something physically we can see and we see the oil soaked birds, but we can't see how all the animals who live, underwater, how we're disrupting, their lives. And I'm glad you mentioned the nets and all the bycatch just from the industrial fishing, and the trawling that happens. And that's so destructive and kills so many more animals than any humans even use.
Yeah.
That's what's useful, I think, about these national marine sanctuaries or any highly
Yeah.
protected areas, because that protects those animals so that they can breed and their habitat is not destroyed.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, and it's a point to point out, people like to eat fish, and we should have fishermen, and they should be, we need fisheries. Fisheries are incredibly important. They contribute billions in dollars to economies up and down the coast. But there are people understand national parks. The national parks have been called our best idea. That applies to the ocean just as well. We should have national parks on the ocean just as we have national parks on land. And it's kind of scary to think that some of these would be opened up. The previous administration actually did. There's a protected area up in New England called Northeast Canyons National Marine Monument, and it was created by Obama, and then Trump opened it up to industrial fishing again, and they would likely do that again. So when it comes to protecting nature, these things have to be long term. Like there's a lot of science that shows the longer a protected area is in place, the greater the benefits are to people. But could you imagine if, like, say Yellowstone, or a national park that's closer to you, if every 4 years it was opened up to condo building, or every 4 years you could do other types of activities there. You could do mining or drilling. And that's kind of what Project 2025 threatens, that are we only going to talk about climate change when one political party is in power? And that's really scary and threatening. And it's going to really hamper the ability of our country to manage these real threats. One of the things that's in this document is that they're going to literally go through all of our federal regulations and federal laws, and they're going to delete the word climate change. And that is a terrible way to address climate change. You cannot address climate change just by deleting the word. These are real changes happening on our planet, and we need to put in place things so that we can address them.
Yeah, we need those long-term commitments. I like your analogy of, like, let's say the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, like every 4 years, it's like, oh, let's exploit it. And then another 4 years, you get someone else in
Okay.
office. Oh, let's protect it again. Oh, let's exploit it. Like the animals are, and then the environment is not gonna be able to survive this back and forth. We need like consistent
Yeah.
long-term protection that's guaranteed. And all this dismantling is so harmful. And I was going to ask about the
I guess
climate. Yeah.
I guess jump in though, but that is a really extreme idea. For the last 100 years, starting with more than 100 years, Teddy Roosevelt in 1908. He was the first president to create a lot of these protected areas out west, and Democrats have used the Antiquities Act. Republicans have used the Antiquities Act. National parks have been created under both parties. And this idea that they can be opened up and closed, depending on who's in power, is a new idea, and it really is terrifying. And I just want to hammer that home.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. And I actually wanted to share a little story about the climate crisis affecting the aquatic environment too, because I was just in Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska. I was interviewing scientists and different people who work with NOAA, as we
Mhm.
talked about doing research on whales and different things. And this park ranger there was telling me about there was a heat wave in the Gulf of Alaska waters around 2015, and it devastated all the wildlife there, from fish to whales, killing off thousands of them, often from starvation, as the aquatic heat wave lasted for several years. And that was a deadly effect of the climate crisis. And so it becomes obvious that the more we invest in dirty fossil fuel energy sources for us as Americans, the more we accelerate the deadly global warming impacts for us and all other animals. And it just kind of seems so irresponsible and unfair, to have that happening, but just also to see, like, she used to think that park ranger that the worst, threats to whales were ship strikes and
Mhm.
like nets, getting them caught in nets. And now they realize it's the warming waters of the climate crisis, which comes from our fossil fuel use.
I was also up there 2 years ago, and you're in the boat and you go up to the glacier, and they show you the pictures of where the glaciers were
Yes,
50 years ago,
right.
and it's completely different landscape. But even just like a year ago or 2 years ago, they show you how quickly those glaciers are melting into the ocean. And they even with the boat that I was on, they fished out some of the ice and they let us hold it. And it shows climate change is happening right now.
Yeah.
And you can see water cascading off of these glaciers as they melt. I came to understand climate change even better after my trip to Alaska a couple of years ago, and to really see it as the threat that it is.
Yeah. If you're just joining us on Radio Free Georgia, this is In Tune to Nature, and I'm host Carrie Freeman, talking with Angelo Villagomez, a senior fellow of conservation at the Center for American Progress, discussing how policies proposed in the right-wing playbook Project 2025, if enacted, could threaten ocean life and exacerbate the climate crisis under a potential Trump presidency. But that is up to us as voters. Angelo, to play devil's advocate, is there anything in the Project 2025 right-wing playbook that you think would be helpful policies or good from an environmental standpoint?
Oh, that is such a great question. Oh my gosh, I hadn't been asked about that, and I hadn't really thought about it in that frame. I'll be honest, I haven't read the entire thing. It's 900 pages. It's full of a
Yeah.
lot of bad ideas. But I did dive deeply into some of the sections around the Department of Interior, and around NOAA, which is how we manage our waters. And I'll say there seem to be a lot of bad ideas.
You weren't
And
like, oh, hey, yeah, let's do this.
Yeah,
Like, oh,
and like
shoot.
crazy ideas, like privatize the weather service. Like that's just
Yeah.
absolutely nuts. Open up our protected areas to fishing. I guess I'll kind of pivot from the way I did not see any stuff that I thought I could get behind.
Yeah.
But I will compare it to things that I did when I was younger.
Yeah.
So like I worked with the Bush administration to create some of the largest protected areas in the world. President Bush designated the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument. He designated the Mariana Trench Marine National Monument. That's where I'm from. I'm from the Mariana Islands in the Western Pacific, the Pacific Remote Islands, Rose Atoll, and this climate change and environmental protection were not always they used to be a much more bipartisan issue.
Right.
And it seems that the Heritage Foundation has really taken their ideas to a really extreme perspective that is basically just gives things away to industry, with no consideration for indigenous peoples that live in these areas, and no consideration for nature, or even the economies that are dependent on protected areas. And in this country, there's a lot of them.
Yeah. If American voters chose to reject Project 2025's right-wing plans, what ocean conservation and climate policies does the Center for American Progress suggest would be socially, ecologically, and fiscally responsible for American politicians to enact instead?
I'm glad you asked that question. So the United States actually has conserved about a third of its ocean. And if you're a environmental nerd like me, the word conservation and preservation mean slightly different things. We also have like some really great protected areas out in the Western Pacific around Hawaii and the Mariana Islands and Wake Atoll. These are places most people have only heard of in relation to World War II. Um, but in the lower 48 in Alaska, and also in the Caribbean, like people sometimes forget that Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands are part of the United States. So we're advocating we're calling it Beyond 30. And it's this idea that, we've already kind of, if you add up all the areas that are protected on the ocean, we're pretty much at a third. But how can we make them more equitable? How can we improve access to ocean resources for all Americans? And how can we improve them? How can we improve the quality? And
Yeah.
so we have ideas on where are the places around the country where humans have a really close connection to the ocean. And I know your listeners are down in Georgia, but I'm up in Washington, D.C. And when I first moved to this part of the country, I did not really understand how people from Maryland were to be from Maryland. And they love the Chesapeake Bay, and they love their crabs, and they love their oysters. And there's a real pride there based on that place. And so what we're proposing is place-based protections that take into account people, cultural uses, and then different types of nearshore policies. How can we protect kelp? How can we protect mangroves? How do we make sure? Or sorry, I just invented a word. How do we ensure that corals and oysters and mussels continue to be healthy and providing protein to humans? Some of these will be no-take protected areas, like very restrictive around fishing, but some of them will be restoration projects, and they'll be near shore and they'll be smaller. So I really don't think moving forward, the idea of protecting these big areas is going to be I mean, it's still important, but I don't think that's going to be the major focus. It's going to be more about uh, you know, how do we involve people more in conservation,
Like bottom up and
yeah,
community
in the areas where they're
oriented
from that they have a connection
coastal.
to. Um,
Yeah.
and some people can forget, again, I'm up in Washington, D.C., and I went to the beach this summer, and I went to a beach in Delaware. Um, and the beach that I went to, everybody was white. There was like one black person on the beach and like one person who looked Spanish. I didn't actually ask. And we can ask ourselves, what is it about our history that makes people of color not go to the beach? Like, to quote Kamala Harris, like, we didn't just fall out of the coconut tree. Like, there's been some historical trauma in this country where people of color aren't welcome at the beach, or that's not just recreation at the beach, it's also fishing at the beach, and there are access issues that kind of express themselves differently all across this country. I imagine there are resource access issues in Georgia. I've never really spent a lot of time down there, but I imagine some of your listeners, maybe some neurons are firing, and they're like, ah, yes, this reminds me of a story where somebody I know, like I have black friends who have been shot at with guns while they were fishing because somebody didn't want them there because of the color of their skin. So at the Center for American Progress, that's the type of stuff we work on. How can we create a country that's more equitable and more fair? And what is the relationship when it comes to the ocean? And there's a way to address this with policy, both at the federal level and at the state level.
Angelo, if listeners are concerned about climate crisis and the health of our environment, environmental justice issues like you're mentioning, what actions can they take during this critical election cycle or really kind of all year round?
I mean, the absolute minimum that you can do is register to vote, and then vote, and then make sure your family votes, and make sure your friends vote. I I think most of the ideas that are put forward by Project 2025 are not popular with Americans. So I'm not going to tell you how to vote. But I think it's register to vote, educate yourself, learn about what the different candidates have to say, and then vote your values. Vote for the people and the groups that are saying the things that you agree with. Um, we do live in a democracy, and voting is the absolute minimum that you can care about. In my life, I went to college, I got a science degree. I care a great deal about environmental issues and climate change. I'm a native Pacific Islander, so I care a great deal about indigenous issues and tribal issues. And if you just vote every 4 years and let the people who get elected run the show, um, they're not going to do the kinds of things that you want. You have to, like, we as a collective society need to participate in the governance of ourselves, and at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. And every single day there's opportunities to participate in our government. Like, just I'll give an example. There's this thing called the Federal Register. If you Google that, and you click on the link for whatever today's date is, uh, literally all of the opportunities to comment on federal actions are going to be listed there, and you could read the document and then tell the government what you think they should do. And there's many ways to participate with the government, but you can also participate with your community. There's nothing stopping you from going, working with your church group or working with your school group to create either an outreach and education club, or you can even collectively go advocate to your leaders. You can everybody should know who their governor is. Everybody should know who their federal congressman is, who their federal senator is. But you also have state level senators and
Yeah.
state level representatives, and you should know their names, and you should have their phone numbers in your speed dial, so
Right.
that
They should be on your contact list. Yeah.
on your contact, like, this should be like a normal thing that people do. Like,
Yes.
call up and you say, hey, there's a pothole in front of my house, I need you to fix it.
Yeah,
But
this is Carrie Freeman again. Hey, I'm calling back.
yeah, exactly.
So their
um
political aides get to know you.
yeah, they should know your names. That's how
Yeah.
democracy works.
Yeah. Well, that's the end of our show, but I want to thank you, Angelo Villagomez, for being with us on Radio Free Georgia's In Tune to Nature program. Thanks for the work you do with the Center for American Progress to develop progressive public policies and enlighten Americans about policy issues affecting democracy and environmental well-being.
And thank you for having me on the show, Carrie.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to In Tune to Nature, broadcasting every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, online at wrfg.org, and on Atlanta radio station 89.3 FM. We post action items, news, and podcasts on the show's website, facebook.com/In Tune to Nature. The views and opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of WRFG, its board, staff, or volunteers. I'm one of those volunteers. I'm host Carrie Freeman, asking you to please support independent, non-commercial media like Radio Free Georgia by donating at wrfg.org. Remember, vote not only to take care of yourself, but to take care of others, including other species who need us to be their voice. Angelo, do I see your ukulele?
Yeah, I could
Yeah,
see.
let's get some. I want some audio of this mediocre ukulele playing. Insert applause here. That was Angelo Villagomez, and I think that was better than mediocre ukulele playing. And I really liked his emphasis on voting. Hopefully we can all get out there and vote early and in person. so that we don't have to deal with long lines on November 5th. And this election and all elections are so much more than just about our own economic short-term interests, which we do need to think about, but we also want to think about the collective and what long-term goals we as a society are voting for, including all the other species we live with. And our policies are directly affecting other animals and oftentimes harming them. And the Project 2025 seems to me like just further exacerbating the harm and the killing of so many other wild animals. And that's why I like to vote with other animals and the whole planet in mind. Before I let you go, there's two organizations I want to mention that I'm starting to volunteer with. One is the Environmental Voter Project, and it's like phone banking in battleground states where they have a database and a script already and information for you, where you make calls to members or citizens in that state who have not been active voters lately, but they are on some list that says they care about the environment. And so you're just letting them know how to get registered or how to vote, and just kind of encouraging them to get civically engaged anymore, since they do care about the environment. So that's the Environmental Voter Project. Another organization I'm volunteering with is called Rideshare to Vote, and that's rideshare and then the number 2, rideshare to vote. And that's a nonprofit where you actually give rides. If you have a vehicle, you sign up and then you get an app on your phone with directions and connections to people who need to get a ride to the polls to make things easier. And this is during early voting, helping people get to the polls, but also on November 5th, Election Day. And Rideshare to Vote is a place if you need a ride to vote, and that would just make it easier for you and less time consuming if somebody came and picked you up, took you to the polls, waited for you to finish voting, and then took you back home or to your job or wherever. Rideshare to Vote is a place that you can go and see about getting a ride to the polls. So Environmental Voter Project and Rideshare to Vote, two ways to get involved this election season. Thanks for listening to In Tune to Nature. Take care of yourself and others. Cheers.